Welcome back to the deep dive. We're digging into the sources you've shared with us, articles, research notes, the whole lot. And today we're unpacking something really complex and, well, frankly, quite alarming. It's the escalating conflict between Iran and Israel.
It really is. The material you provided shows a situation that's fundamentally changed.
Right?
We're past the shadow war fought mainly through proxies.
Right.
Now we're seeing more and more direct confrontations. Everything from pretty sophisticated cyber campaigns to major physical strikes, including, recent reports about targeting nuclear sites.
Okay, let's get into this. Our goal today is basically to trace how we got here, understand the key forces driving this, and really grapple with the challenges this kind of modern conflict throws up.
Yeah.
And the sources, they point to some complex layers, especially in the digital world, and of course these dramatic events in June 2025 we need to cover. So where do we start? What's the evolution look like based on this material?
Well, to really get the current picture, the sources say we need to look back a bit. The big shift started after Iran's 1979 revolution.
Okay.
That's when Iran's whole stance towards Israel changed fundamentally. It led to their support for groups like Hezbollah in Lebanon, Hamas.
The so-called axis of resistance.
Exactly. That term comes up a lot in the sources, and for decades, that's how this conflict mainly played out, through these proxy groups.
But the Gaza war, kicking off October 7th, 2023, that seems like a massive accelerant based on this research.
Oh, absolutely. The material clearly shows the intensity of the Gaza conflict led to Israel significantly stepping up its targeting of Iranian personnel and forces, especially inside Syria.
And that immediately raised fears everywhere about a much bigger regional war, right?
Definitely. You could feel the tension ratcheting up across the region.
And we see hints of that building pressure in the sources even before the really big direct strikes, like the killing of Qasem Soleimani, that Iranian commander in Damascus, December 2023.
Yes, that's highlighted. A senior figure, one of the highest ranking killed around that time. It was a clear signal.
A signal, yeah. But spring 2024, that's where the sources say the conflict really crossed a major line into those direct state-on-state hits.
Precisely, that's the turning point.
And this is where it gets really intense. The material lays out the Israeli bombing of the Iranian consulate complex in Damascus, April 1st, 2024.
Yeah.
This wasn't subtle. A direct hit on what Iran considers its territory, and major casualties, including very senior IRGC figures, like Mohammad Reza Zahedi.
Quds Force commander. Predictably vowed a direct response, and the sources detail how that played out.
It started with seizing that ship, right? The MSC Arius?
That's right. April 13th, in the Strait of Hormuz. It was linked to an Israeli owner, and Iranian commandos helicoptered onto it. A very overt, dramatic move.
Showing they were willing to act openly. And then, just hours later, April 13th, 14th, the big one, the Iranians strikes directly on Israel.
Yeah, the one everyone was waiting for, but still stunning in scale. Hundreds of drones, ballistic missiles.
And the sources note proxies got involved too. Houthis, Iraqi militias.
They did. Simultaneous attacks, suggesting coordination. But what's also fascinating is the international response that's documented. The US, UK, France, even Jordan.
Actively shooting down Iranian drones.
Right, to help defend Israel. And there were reports mentioned in the material about intelligence sharing too, from places like Saudi Arabia and the UAE.
But despite that huge barrage, the research suggests the actual damage in Israel was, well, pretty limited.
Relatively limited, yes. Mostly impacting Nevermim Air Base, but it apparently stayed operational. Tragically, the worst physical harm reported was a young child, 7 years old, badly injured by shrapnel.
Awful. And Israel hit back on April 19th, strikes in Iran and Syria.
Correct. And the analysis in the sources, looking at that specific exchange, runs limited impact. Israel's seemingly, restrained initial counterstrike suggested, at that moment anyway, Maybe both sides wanted to pull back from the brink.
A desire for de-escalation, perhaps.
Seemed like it, yeah. Step back from all-out war.
But that didn't last long, did it? According to the sources you shared, summer and fall 2024 saw things heat up again significantly.
It really did. Those assassinations in late July 2024 are flagged as key moments. Ismail Haniyeh, the Hamas political leader, killed in Tehran.
Right, July 31st. And just before that, Fuad Shukr, a top Hezbollah commander, killed in Lebanon.
Exactly. And both Iran and Hezbollah quickly promised severe retaliation for those. The rhetoric ramped right back up.
And then September, that seemed like a massive widespread escalation with Hezbollah that caught everyone's attention.
Truly unprecedented events described there. Mass electronic device explosions, pagers, walkie-talkies.
Across Lebanon and Syria, September 17th, 18th. Widely attributed to Israel in the sources.
Yes. Targeting Hezbollah members directly, killing dozens, causing huge disruption, shock. A very different kind of attack.
And Hezbollah's response? The research mentions rocket attacks into northern Israel, hitting deeper than before.
Yeah, September 22nd, reaching places like Nazareth, areas further south than usual.
Then, Israel kept targeting Hezbollah leadership. Ibrahim Makul, Ahmed Waiba, killed September 23rd.
Yes, more senior commanders taken out. And then the big one, Hezbollah's leader, Hassan Nasrallah, assassinated on September 27th.
Wow. And the material mentions an Israeli ground invasion of Lebanon starting around September 30th, though one source notes it needed more detail.
Yes, it mentions the start of ground operations, marking another significant phase in that escalating conflict with Hezbollah.
So, after all that intensity in September, the sources describe Iran launching its own missile strike on Israel October 1st.
That's right, a large barrage, around 200 missiles reported.
And Israel retaliated again later that month, October 26th.
Yes, strikes reported hitting targets in multiple Iranian cities and also near Damascus, again, and Syria.
And right after those October strikes, more threats flying back and forth, Iran promising a harsh response, Israel warning about potential Iranian actions coming out of Iraq.
Exactly. That whole period, spring through fall 2024, it just shows how volatile things were. How quickly it could swing from maybe de-escalation back to major attacks targeting leaders and infrastructure.
But like you said earlier, this isn't just happening in the physical realm.
Not at all.
The sources spend a lot of time on the cyber conflict, this parallel war that's raging and posing totally new kinds of challenges, especially to ideas like, state sovereignty.
That's where it gets really interesting, and frankly, quite murky. Cyber attacks let states hit critical infrastructure, security systems, maybe even officials.
Without physically crossing a border.
Exactly. No boots on the ground needed, potentially. And the Iran-Israel conflict is presented as a prime example of how this digital capability is now just baked into state strategy.
And Stuxnet back in 2010, that worm targeting Iranian nuclear centrifuges, widely blamed on the US and Israel, that's called out as a key moment here.
Absolutely pivotal, according to the material. It's described as really pushing Iran to heavily invest in its own offensive cyber power.
Like a wake-up call.
Pretty much.
Yeah.
They saw it as a way to counter Israel's tech edge, project their own influence, and the sources mention Iranian counteractions. Things like the Shamoon attacks in 2012, 2016 hitting energy firms.
And more recently, attacks on Israeli ports, water systems, 2020.
Those are reported incidents, yes.
Yeah.
And the research you shared points to a major surge in Iranian cyber attacks targeting Israel since October 7, 2023.
Focused on what? Military systems, government employees?
Both seem to be targets. Using phishing tactics, trying to trick people into giving up info against government workers, trying to breach military networks.
And specific hacking groups get named Handala Hack, Nethem 3.
They do, and they make claims. Handala Hack, for instance, claimed they got into Israeli radar systems just before that October 1, 2024 missile strike.
Did they? Israeli officials apparently denied anything unusual happened, but
But the claim itself is significant. It shows how cyberops are used alongside or to support Kanish actions. Nathan 3 claimed they'd infiltrated the Israeli Ministry of Defense. Whether all claims are true or not, it's part of the warfare now.
so it's this constant cyber back and forth deeply woven into the larger escalation. It allows for ongoing attacks, disruption. Maybe sometimes keeping things below the boiling point for a full military response, but still doing real damage.
That's exactly the dynamic described, and it seriously complicates things like international law and sovereignty. Attribution, figuring out who actually launched an attack when it could be bounced around or disguised. That's incredibly tough.
Yeah.
And then trying to apply old rules, like use of force or armed attack from the UN Charter Articles 251 through, how do those fit cyberspace? What counts as an armed attack digitally? It's really vague.
And how do you legally respond if you can't even prove who hit you?
Precisely.
Yeah,
It just blurs those lines between war and peace, makes the legal framework struggle, and leaves states vulnerable in new ways. People are trying. There's the Talon Manual, that academic guide, UN discussions.
but the sources suggest there aren't really clear binding global rules for this yet?
Not really, no. Which leads us right up to the latest, and maybe the most significant event detailed in these sources. One that took the kinetic side of things to another level again, hitting Iran's core strategic goals.
You mean the Israeli airstrikes on Iranian nuclear facilities? June 12th, 2025. One source even gave it a name, Operation Rising Lion.
That's the one. And this wasn't just a single pinpoint strike, according to the material. It's described as a wider operation, hitting key sites across Iran.
Targeting what, specifically? Nuclear sites like Natanz? Military bases?
Yes, Natanz is mentioned. Other nuclear facilities, military sites, command control centers, and critically key people.
Personnel involved in the nuclear program, and leadership figures too, like the IRGC commander Hossein Salami, Gholam Ali Rashid. Nuclear scientists.
That's what the reports indicate. Personnel suggests an aim to seriously disrupt the program, not just damage equipment.
And the sources quote or paraphrase Israeli PM Netanyahu, describing it as a targeted military operation to roll back the Iranian threat.
Yes, and crucially, adding it would continue for as many days as it takes. That suggests a potentially open-ended campaign, not just a one-off strike.
The timing here seems critical too, based on the sources. It came right after the IAEA, the UN nuclear watchdog, reportedly found Iran was breaching its non-proliferation commitment.
Correct. And it also happened while US-Iranian nuclear talks were basically stalled. The sources mention past efforts, like Trump's commonized dismissive reactions, calling Israel a cancerous tumor.
And there were specific threats and exchanges mentioned in May and June 2025 leading up to this.
Yes, that context is provided. Plus, an Israeli military official is quoted telling the BBC around that time that Iran had enough fissile material for bombs within days.
So from Israel's perspective, a dangerous threshold had been crossed.
That appears to be the justification presented. A clear and imminent threat in their view.
So after such a huge event, what were the immediate reactions noted in the sources? And what are experts saying about Israel's goals and what happens next?
Well, immediately, the sources note the U.S. government trying to put distance between itself and the strike. Secretary of State Marco Rubio quoted saying the U.S. was not involved. Unequivocally.
Okay.
One source also mentions Iran launching a drone attack shortly after, though details seem limited in that account.
And the thinking behind Israel's move, what goals are experts discussing in the material?
Several possibilities are explored. Obviously, delaying Iran's nuclear program significantly, degrading their ability to hit back effectively, and maybe for some, hoping it might spark internal change in Iran.
Regime change.
That possibility is raised, but experts cited also warn strongly against that idea, saying the outcome could be even worse. Maybe something more hardline, like an IRGC dominated by the military. A very risky gamble.
Puts Iran in a tough spot for responding, doesn't it?
Incredibly tough. The material discusses their dilemma. Do they feel forced to hit U.S. interests now, or keep it focused on Israel and proxies? Rely on asymmetric attacks around the world? Experts seem divided on Iran's actual current strength versus how motivated they might be now to just, sprint for a bomb even faster. And you had Houthi threats mentioned too against the U.S. if Iran was attacked. Another layer of risk.
And what about the U.S.-Israel relationship itself? This must put a strain on it.
Significant implications there. The sources point to potential tension, especially depending on strategic differences, maybe Trump's past approach influencing things. One expert suggested this June 12th event could fundamentally change that relationship, depending on how much the U.S. knew beforehand and how it reacts going forward.
And the wider region, the ripple effects must be huge.
Undeniably significant and deeply worrying, according to the analysis. The risk of dragging neighbors deeper into a wider war is obvious. The impact on civilians, humanitarian crises, Syria, Lebanon, Jordan, already fragile.
Not to mention the economy, commerce, flights, oil prices.
All potentially disrupted. Significant volatility. Some analysis in the sources seem to view this strike on the nuclear program as maybe, inevitable given Iran's trajectory and failed diplomacy. But everyone agrees the outcome is totally uncertain.
Which brings up a crucial point some experts raise in the material. Does Israel actually have a plan for what comes after this strike in Iran beyond just degrading the nuclear program?
That's a major question being debated. Is there a clear, achievable day after strategy? The suggestion is one is urgently needed, and maybe it needs to connect back to broader efforts, like finding a path to peace in Gaza eventually.
It's been quite a journey through this material you shared, from the proxy routes to these escalating direct strikes, the huge role of cyber culminating in this dramatic attack on Iran's nuclear program in June 2025.
It really does lay bare how warfare itself is changing. This whole timeline, as presented in these sources, it just shows a world where those old lines between war and peace are getting incredibly blurry, and basic ideas, like international norms, state sovereignty, they're being challenged constantly, especially with everything being so interconnected digitally.
So considering everything we've unpacked from this material, the intense escalation, the way kinetic and cyber conflict are now tangled together, it really leaves us with a big question, doesn't it? How prepared is the international system with its, older rules to actually handle conflicts like this that just ignore physical borders and old legal ideas? What does this whole Iran-Israel case study really tell us, you, the listener, about where sovereignty and international relations are heading in this hyper-connected and frankly pretty dangerous world?